sharing a reading experience. I'm reading from a book entitled For James, and I'm sharing it with you now. I'll go through the chapter called Atheist. I hope you listen and receive something worthwhile from this. This video might inspire you to read this book. It's my hope that you'll search for the best books and gain information and ideas to help you to become a better person. The more you read, the better you'll think. And the better you think, the more you'll be able to face life's challenges successfully. Atheist. After reading the second chapter of Friedrich Nietzsche's book, Beyond Good and Evil, I thought to myself, what a bitter, ranting intellectual he is. After a while, I came to the conclusion, one should not be surprised from being poisoned in the midst of so much poison. For the person wanting to embrace their inner nihilistic beliefs, this book was nirvana. As for me, I put Friedrich Nietzsche's cynical work down. In speaking with atheists, I've noticed a pattern to their approach. Let me give you just a couple of things I've noticed. Because atheists don't seem to logically reason out their beliefs when comparing them to theology, they often stoop to irrational name-calling with such things as, God is a myth like Thor or Zeus that speaks in the language of a fortune cookie with the same results. Those who are stirred by God in some way are drug-induced or crazy or liars, mainly so they can con people out of their money. If there's a convincing testimony of Christ, the encounter is called a type of hallucination caused by LSD or a surgeon stimulating certain areas of the brain, or oxygen deprivation, or some sort of electrical stimulation. There's no evidence that atheism can't discredit somehow, and since they can't prove a negative, they're determined not to let anyone prove a positive either. The atheist will tell you, the followers of God tortured to death anyone who denied him, and without some sort of threat or deceit, patrons flee like rats in a sinking ship. Atheists like to find and point out abuses of religions by agenda-driven political leaders, no matter how far back they have to go to find them. These abuses have no more to do with God than the deaths during World War II at Nagasaki and Hiroshima have to do with Einstein coming up with the formula E equals mc squared. The evil and suffering of mankind is a separate issue from the question of God's existence. But evil and suffering demonstrate that people are free to choose rather than being under control of a dictator. But what about natural evil as proof that there's no God? Is suffering evil? Hopefully everyone understands that bad things happening doesn't always involve evil intent. These are actually two separate issues, despite what people might think. Evil is not suffering. Plato argued that evil is not a thing, but the absence of something, such as the thief lacking honesty. Others have argued that evil contributes to the overall good, and the universe is greater than it could be without evil, since we can only understand goodness when we can contrast it with evil. Being able to choose between choices of good and evil is another way of saying God made rationality possible. Rational thought is the process of evaluating choices. The process of reasoning is only possible in an environment where there is freedom to choose God's will or another way that opposes God's will. Evil is opposing God whether suffering is involved or not. To say suffering is evil is to say life is evil. Suffering and pain are associated in every aspect of life. Think of growing pains. Scientists can show all living things suffer, even plants. You don't think that a single cell organism pulling itself in two doesn't hurt? It most likely does, but it's life. Not to divide is death. Suffering brings growth, understanding, and refinement. Suffering has a necessary purpose. Suffering might be considered good or bad, depending on the viewer. Choosing suffering is more difficult because it opens the way to the possibility of a life of depth and significance. In Miguel de Unamuno's 1913 book entitled The Tragic Sense of Life, he states, quote, "What makes us human is the fact that we suffer," unquote. Miguel de Unamuno said suffering was not a problem to detach from, as Buddha suggested. Suffering is instead an essential part of what it means to exist as a human being, and suffering is a vital part of that existence. If we turn away from suffering, we are not only turning away from what makes us human, as it has been suggested, we are also turning away from consciousness itself. Only when we face suffering can we become capable of truly loving another suffering being. Turning away from suffering might be easier, but it will limit us and cut us off from an essential part of ourselves. Gabriel Shizawa's article called Why Grief is My Greatest Teacher declared, quote, "My capacity to feel deep pain and anguish carved out a deeper reservoir of joy in my soul. Recognizing the potential joy that existed in even the littlest things gave me a reason to keep living," unquote. She further stated, "We do not have to walk alone when there are loving humans all around us, waiting to buoy us up. As we struggle together, we experience a fragment of what it's like to suffer the way Christ did. We feel a sliver of his anguish and of his love as we learn how to carry each other's pain," unquote. Despite a few good answers, the people who believe in deity understand they don't know everything. They understand that some things they believe are not quite right and there's more to learn. The position of faith is not one of having a perfect knowledge of things. I don't know everything, but I'm going forward on what I do know, and I'll learn more as I progress. That's a sincere position, even if it isn't the ideal position. Do we judge the science by the works of Thales of Miletus, who said the earth was flat, a disk floating on a vast sea? Or should we judge Ptolemy, who taught people how to improve situations in their lives with heavenly bodies, depending on their heavenly body's inner power and the influence of their respective positions? No, we don't judge them in all or nothing terms. We only say that science is progressing and we're learning more. What's out there doesn't change, but our understanding does. The atheist, on the other hand, claims a position of evidence of absence to prove they know things by the method of rejecting the possibility of unknown things. It would be like me looking for a contractor. Someone tells me of a contractor who built a building I like. I walk into the building, I look in all the rooms, I check the closets, I check the stairwells, I even go into the basement. He's not there. Obviously, he doesn't exist because I didn't see the contractor in plain view when and where I thought he should be. I conclude that I must have been lied to, and there is no such thing as a contractor. In my mind, I have shown the absence of the evidence of a contractor is the evidence of the absence of a contractor. The Atheists use science and reason for the purpose of narrowing the scope of possible reality, not easily noticed. That's a dishonest position. We do not know things by just using one method. Other ways we know will be discussed later on in this book. For now, let us put the atheist in another role with the same characteristics. This time, instead of using the word God, let us use the word dinosaur, a dinosaur skeptic. Rather than believing that dinosaurs once lived on the earth, the skeptic points out that no person has ever seen a dinosaur. Also, the skeptic points out that these so called dinosaur bones aren't really bones at all, but rather minerals of a different consistency and hardness than what surrounds them. Instead, the skeptic talks of fertile fossil forces. Of course, the skeptic has been told by those he describes as imaginative, visionary fools that no known laws of physics can explain the skeptic's theory. However, the skeptic points out that scientists simply haven't detected those forces yet. Give them more time and research, they eventually will. This is the strategy atheists use. They can't infer the existence of something based on indicators of what is known. Instead, they invent rules based on the unknown. Imagine Greece in 500 BC using all they knew to understand the world they lived in. They would see three continents, part of Europe, part of Africa, and part of Asia. They would know of no other planets outside the solar system, and they could only see a limited number of stars. What does this Greek knowledge tell you about the actual conditions of existence? Very little. Today, we're in the same position. We're unable to find life on planets other than our own. Does this tell you there is no other type of life outside this world? No, because not found does not mean found not to exist. Yet this reverse thinking is what the atheist does. The atheist claims to know from a position of not knowing and claims it to be a fact. The atheist doesn't know what happens after death and can't know while yet claiming to know. In their mind, the absence of evidence is evidence of nothing there. I wish I had more friends. I wish they were good friends. Does this wish of good friends make friends an illusion? If I wish for heaven, what the hell? Just because I have a wish for something says nothing about whether that something is true or false, only that it is what I wish for. You can't be honest in telling me I will never have more friends or there's no heaven. Yet I am honest when I tell you that I hope for such things. It's my hope that really bothers the atheist. As an example, on page 114 of the atheist Friedrich Nietzsche's Ecce Homo, under the chapter heading of Why I Write Such Excellent Books, speaks of God and religion in this way, quote, "Now rageth my hammer ruthlessly against its prison," unquote. Friedrich Nietzsche was a major influence on the radical German socialists who created the Communist Manifesto, pitting the capital-owning bourgeoisie against the working class or the proletariat. The radical German socialist Karl Marx wrote, quote, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs," unquote. Since the original primitive tribal system shared the same rocks to break open the bones for their marrow, Why can't we do that with everything? Marx pictured a perfect society where everyone would work harmoniously towards the good of the greater whole. Karl Marx reviled against religion, saying it was the opiate of the people. He went on to say, the abolition of religion as an illusory happiness of the people is required for real happiness. Karl Marx believed people made up God from their imagination and preferred these dreams over the real world. All Marxist based regimes where atheism is a central part of the political philosophy have echoed that statement with the elimination of over 149 million people in order to have societies free from religious and moral heritages. Another thing that seems to bother atheists is coming up with a common sense conclusion of what is unknown based on what is known. The most basic example would include I believe I will see the sun tomorrow because I saw the sun today. The atheist David Hume preached skepticism as the only way to think, but rejected skepticism as proper to everyday life. He said, in defense of his apparent contradiction, that the sun will not rise tomorrow is no less intelligible a proposition and implies no more contradiction than the affirmation that it will rise. To choose an atheistic position is failing to consider what is unknown based on what is known. Let's say that there will come a time in the future when you have some terminal disease like cancer. Someone comes along and says, give me $500 and I'll write a magical spell that you can carry around with you so you can be cured. Because you're desperate, you think to yourself, what have I got to lose? And then you fork out the money. If you would do this because of a slim chance that the spell will work, even when you know that it is unlikely to work, ask yourself this. Why not consider all the witnesses throughout all times that say there is something more than this life? Isn't their free witness worth more than the money charging incantation writer? Given that no life after death and life after death could be right, what's the smart way to proceed? If there's no afterlife, then neither the believer nor the non believer will be worse off after death. Now consider the tremendous issue at stake and the risk involved in belief and unbelief. William Dubois said we should all inspire to a broader and fuller life. To attain that, we need to believe in the possibility of progress. If we lose that belief, we suffer from a form of death, existence without growth. So, to grow, we must believe in life, believe in the source of life. Additionally, we must confess we are ignorant and have limitations so we can be open to a higher power. Only by this admission can we discover our true being. In religious terms, we must die and be resurrected. The course of action that should be taken should be clear, even if you currently doubt there is life after death. You shouldn't be so foolish as to continue your life as a fugitive who believes they have escaped the long arm of the law by running through a tunnel of denial only to find pointing guns on the other side. Victor Steinger writes at the end of page 257 in his book that, quote, atheists have the comfort of no fears for the afterlife, unquote. And as a result, many atheists claim they don't fear death. Yet, all creatures fear death because they have the desire to survive. Victor slips and exposes his fear of death in his last words of his book by saying, quote, Narnava is not heaven. Narnava is nothingness. However, I'm not quite ready for nothingness. I'm willing to trade Narnava for the joy and the anguish of life for at least a few more years. An honest atheist would admit death is the ultimate loss, since all success found in life's work or family or any relationship will end. Believers have the desire to live too, but death is not a loss for the believer, but gain. As their thinking stands, atheists are like birds trying to seek happiness in an evaporating cloud where their pointless flying is a tale told by idiots, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The atheist wants lasting love, while knowing love won't last. For the materialist, the future won't be any better than the past. Hope doesn't make sense if there's nothing but this life. If reality is accidental, there's no purpose to a temporary, meaningless existence. Hope is lost when we realize there's no eternal foundation for a human identity. If there's no point or victory from racing, then why run at all? But there is a point, and hope is the clue that there's a deeper meaning in life. To choose hope is to make a better choice. And since there is hope, the atheist can choose that hope. The world's most notorious atheist, Anthony Flew, changed his mind and wrote the book, There is a God. The famous Marxist atheist, Alistair MacIntyre, shocked the philosophical world by becoming a Catholic in the 1980s, stating that any explanation of a human moral compass is inadequate without a metaphysical grounding. MacIntyre explains that his conversion to Catholicism occurred in his 50s as a result of being convinced of Thomism while attempting to disabuse his students of its authenticity. And if the atheist refuses hope, what does this tell you? It might tell you that the atheist would rather feel justified than hopeful. It tells you that there is pride rather than ignorance involved. Proverbs 13:10 of the New International Version Bible tells us, Where there is strife, there is pride, but wisdom is found in those that take advice. Unquote. Why the strife? Because pride is not proud of others. Pride wants to look down and tear down others. The more pride one has, the more they dislike pride in others. The proud person is in direct competition with the other person. Now, the other person that does well is the enemy of the proud person. Now ask, who can no one look down on because he is superior to all? God is superior to all, making God the ultimate enemy of the proud. In the movie, God's Not Dead, the atheist professor shows a list of great intellectuals who are also atheists. The underlying message is, of course, smart men don't believe in God, and if you're smart, neither will you. The atheist says God is only known among the poor, the ignorant, and the criminal. Yet all people in all classes and intellectual levels have differing opinions about the existence or non existence of God. This has always been the case throughout history. To say otherwise would be dishonest. Many scholars believe that there is something greater than what can be measured. On the following pages is a very short list of some of the many that I've found. Max Carl Ernst Ludwig Planck was a physicist who theorized quantum physics. He was a man of highest moral values who spoke to Hitler directly in an attempt to reverse his radical policies. In his 1950 published book entitled Scientific Autobiography and Other Papers, it was common for Max Planck to praise God with such things as, quote, religion is the link that binds man to his God. It is founded on a respectful humility before a supreme supernatural power to which all human life is subject, unquote. Werner Karl Heisenberg was a physicist instrumental in quantum mechanics, along with many other important works. In the winter 1975 edition of Cross Currents article entitled Scientific Truth and Religious Truth, Heisenberg stated, quote, although I am convinced of the unassailability of scientific truth in its own sphere, I have never been able to dismiss the content of religious thinking, unquote. Paul Dirac made contributions to quantum electrodynamics. In May of 1963, the edition of Scientific America, in an article entitled The Evolution of the Physicist's Picture of Nature, Dirac describes natural and physical laws by saying, quote, God is a mathematician of the very highest order, and he used very advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. Our feeble attempts at mathematics enable us to understand a bit of the universe, and as we proceed to develop higher and higher mathematics, we can hope to understand the universe better, unquote. Albert Einstein was asked, have you ever read Emil Ludwig's book on Jesus? Emil Ludwig, Jesus, Einstein replied, is shallow. Jesus is too colossal for the pen of phrasemongers, however artful. No man can dispose of Christianity with a bon mot. You accept the historical existence of Jesus? Unquestionably, no one could read the Gospels without feeling the actual presence of Jesus. His personality pulsates in every word. No myth is filled with such life. How different, for instance, is the impression which we receive from an account of legendary heroes of antiquity like Theseus. Theseus and other heroes of this type lack the authentic vitality of Jesus. Ludwig Lewison, in one of his recent books, claims that the sayings of Jesus paraphrases the sayings of other prophets. No man, Einstein replied, can deny the fact that Jesus existed, nor that his sayings are beautiful, even if some of them have been said before. No one has expressed them so divinely as he, unquote. Paul Charles William Davis is a physicist who stated, quote, science has its own faith-based belief system. All science proceeds on the assumption that nature is ordered in a rational and in an intelligible way, unquote. Davis goes on to say, the idea that the laws exist reasonlessly is deeply anti-rational. Davis then states, the multi-universe theory is increasingly popular, but it doesn't so much explain the laws of physics as dodge the whole issue, unquote. Finally, Davis gives us this insight into scientific reasoning. Quote, Isaac Newton first got the idea of absolute, universal, perfect, immutable laws from the Christian doctrine that God created the world and ordered it in a rational way. Unquote. When we think of ancient civilizations with advanced astronomy, technology, philosophy, mathematics, and architecture, why didn't any of those cultures come up with the scientific method? These cultures didn't come up with a scientific method because they didn't have a concept about who God was and why he created things. An orderly, predictable, rational world where his laws are also orderly, predictable, and rational. And since humans are created in the image of God, they are rational beings that can understand his order. Christian scientists rejected Aristotle's contention that necessity of nature constitutes the accumulation of deterministic natural tendencies, and that these tendencies are themselves rooted in the natures or essence of the natural substances. Francis S. Collins stated, quote, I realized my atheism was dangerously thin. Seeking to prop this up, I began a journey to try to understand why intellectually sophisticated people could actually believe in God. And to my dismay, found that atheism turned out to be the least rational of all the choices. Unquote. If education and intelligence are not a reliable indicator of belief or non belief, what is? Answer, the factor of personality. The most notable predictor is the trait of pride, as previously mentioned. As it turns out, despite what an atheist tells you, atheism is something that is believed, not something that is proven. I don't want God to exist doesn't really mean God doesn't exist. I wish you the best in your happy readings. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, adieu, so long.